On our broadcast tonight, sea change, why President Obama is being accused of falling short on the environment today with the whole world watching. Also tonight, we debut our new poll. How are Americans grading their new president right about now? Underwater, entire neighborhoods submerged after deadly floods drenched parts of the South. Tracking swine flu in close quarters, what a project on campus could tell the rest of us about the spread of the flu. And how many shots will kids need this season? Also making a difference by sweating it out. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. Back when he was running for office and addressed throngs of people in Berlin, we were there when Barack Obama said, quote, "This is the moment when we must come together to save this planet." But today, President Obama, in the eyes of a lot of environmentalists, fell short on that topic. While many different countries under fire on the environment for years came to today's UN gathering here in New York, ready to change, ready to get cleaner, President Obama's speech left a lot of people wanting more, and the reason may be health care. That's because it's what he needs from Congress most and first. In a moment, our exclusive poll, what Americans have to say about their president and their country right about now. First, we begin our coverage at the UN with our chief environmental affairs correspondent, Ann Thompson. Ann, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. When Barack Obama became president, many in the world hoped the U.S. would take a leadership role in stopping climate change. That led to big expectations for today's speech, expectations that were quickly dashed. The world wanted to hear President Obama make a commitment to specific cuts in carbon dioxide emissions. Instead of action, it got talk.
We understand the gravity of the climate threat. We are determined to act.
And even one line that sounded a lot like his predecessor, George W. Bush, who refused to agree to emission cuts without similar actions from India and China.
But those rapidly growing developing nations that will produce nearly all the growth in global carbon emissions in the decades ahead must do their part as well.
This was not the leadership the world's diplomats wanted.
Many of the key players that I talked to today were a little disappointed with what the U.S. brought to the table. They were hoping that there would be more.
Carbon dioxide emissions from burning oil and coal are changing the Earth's climate. 80% of those emissions come from the world's richest countries. The two biggest, China and the U.S., each account for 20%. While the U.S. held its cards close, surprisingly, China put some on the table.
China stands ready to work with all countries to build an even better future for the generations to come.
President Hu Jintao said China would increase its renewable and nuclear energy to 15% by 2020, plant more forests to absorb carbon, and cut emissions, but not by a specific target. The most dramatic pledge came from Japan, responsible for 4% of the world's emissions.
For its midterm goal, Japan will aim to reduce its emissions by 25% by 2020.
At stake, the fate of island nations like the Maldives that could be swamped by rising sea levels. With meetings in Copenhagen this December to reach a new global climate pact, the window to act is closing fast.
If we miss it again in Copenhagen, then basically we're out of time and very little chance to keep global temperature increase below 2 degrees centigrade, which scientists have told us we need to do.
With today's announcements from China and Japan and India's pledge to increase energy efficiency and find a cleaner way to burn coal, as one diplomat put it, the pressure is now squarely on the United States. Brian?
Ann Thompson across town from us here in New York at the UN. Ann, thanks. And now, as promised, our look at how this president is viewed these days. Our brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll just out tonight, making its debut here. Our political director and chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd, here with us while the president, of course, is in New York. And Chuck, we're just a few months, really, into this administration. So many issues out there.
Well, Brian, he's in the midst of a difficult campaign to push health care, to push the economic policies as he's been trying to get past, and yet he may face an even greater challenge, convincing a skeptical public that the war in Afghanistan is still worth fighting.
Facing a tough decision about troop levels and strategy in Afghanistan, President Obama also has to contend with eroding public support for the war, according to the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. A clear majority, 59%, is less confident that the war President Obama once referred to as a candidate, as the good war, will come to a successful end. Only 28% are confident. And a majority of those surveyed, 51%, are opposed to sending in more troops, with just 34% supporting.
Personally, I don't think we belong there. I don't think we belong there at all.
No government health care! But on the heels of a contentious summer-long debate, the president has delayed dealing with Afghanistan to campaign vigorously for his health care reform plan. The poll shows he has stabilized the political situation. While only 39% think his plan is a good idea, there are still more people who tell us they'd rather see his plan pass, 45%, than see no change at all, 39%.
The overall cost of health care is just mind-boggling. So we do need to reform health care.
Meanwhile, there is a disconnect between the president's personal popularity and the overall popularity of his policies. 46% like him and his policies, 31% like him but not his policies.
It's kind of hard because I do like him personally. I would say most people like him personally. But his policies as of the past couple of months, that's where I lost faith in him.
People still say the economy is the #1 issue, but there are signs of optimism. 47% believe the economy will get better. That's a 9-point jump since April. Still, 50% believe things will get worse or stay the same.
Brian, a few housekeeping notes. His job approval rating, 51%, good, not great. 54%, though, tell us they don't have confidence in his economic policy. So he's still dealing with this issue of being more personally well-liked versus the issues.
Now, we said at the top of the broadcast, bunch of people watching his speech at the UN today say, oh, he's holding back. That's all about health care. Right. That's how big this health care fight has become. What are the people saying about how big it's become?
Well, you know, it's interesting. All of Washington takes a beating in this poll. Congressional Republicans, congressional Democrats, Congress in general, people, their own representative, they have negative views about. And you wonder, the #1 issue is the economy. The way they are going to measure the economy getting better is jobs. The conversation they're hearing in Washington, health care. And you sat there, health care getting in the way of energy, health care maybe getting in the way of the Afghanistan debate, and health care getting in the way of the debate that people are having around the kitchen table right now. Where's my job and where's my next job?
And so it goes. Chuck Todd with the new numbers just out tonight. Always a pleasure. Thanks. One final note here. The wealthy suburb of Bedford, New York, north of here, is the home of Richard Gere, Martha Stewart, and perhaps by tomorrow, Muammar Qaddafi of Libya. Donald Trump's organization says it's looking into published reports that Qaddafi has literally put down stakes at Trump's estate in Bedford, New York for this week's UN visit, and that he's trying to pitch his tent, including the requisite satellite dishes, on the estate, which is known as Seven Springs. Late today, a local newspaper in Bedford reported the town has issued a stop work order because nobody had gotten a permit for the Qaddafi tent. Now to the alleged terrorist plot we've been reporting on for days, apparently directed at some targets here in New York City. Tonight, police and FBI agents are still trying to unravel exactly what it is they've got here. In the meantime, the feds have issued new advisories for sports venues and hotels across the country. Our Justice correspondent Pete Williams in our Washington newsroom with the latest on this tonight. Pete, good evening.
Brian, the fact that these Homeland Security advisories are so general, covering such a wide range of places, is a clear sign that investigators still don't know what the actual target was. Because investigators believe a target of the plot might have been mass transit, security was more visible today on some big city trains and subways, including the Long Island Railroad commuter line. A Homeland Security bulletin urged more vigilance at sports arenas, luxury hotels, and entertainment complexes, but stressed there are no known plots against such sites. In New York, the police commissioner said his department did not change security in response to the federal bulletin.
Obviously, they think that it's helpful. As I say, we are every day up to a level that I think exceeds any other city that I'm aware of.
In New York and Denver, scores of police and federal agents have been checking companies that sell the kinds of materials listed on the laptop of Najibullah Zazi as potential bomb ingredients to see if he or others suspected in the plot bought any of the supplies.
They were inquiring about if any individuals or any companies were coming in and purchasing large quantities of chemicals.
Similar questions, too, at storage facilities. So far, nothing has turned up. And more is emerging about Zazi. He recently filed for bankruptcy, more than $50,000 in debt, but officials doubt that was a sign of a coming suicide attack. And authorities say Zazi has tried to mislead them, saying, for example, a possible attack target might be a big discount store outside New York. They say there's no reason to think that's true. Trying to identify who was involved in this plot remains the urgent priority, with agents checking on anyone who was in contact with Zazi. And officials say more arrests and more charges are coming, Brian.
Pete Williams in Washington. Pete, thanks. And we turn our attention now to this epic flooding in the South. Today there was more rain, more deaths brought on by several feet of floodwater covering a huge area. Our own Ron Mott is live in Powder Springs, Georgia, northwest of the city of Atlanta. Ron, good evening.
Brian, good evening to you. Tonight, the death toll here in Georgia is at least 8, with a suspected 9th fatality up in Tennessee, where a man has been missing since Sunday night. And as you can tell, the sun came out today, though it is far from picture perfect. The only thing moving across parts of Interstate 20 during the morning rush outside Atlanta was rushing water. And with forecasters calling for even more rain in coming days, officials and residents alike are hoping to get a lot of this water down before the skies open up again, Brian.
Ron Mott in Georgia. What a miserable situation. So much suffering going on across a huge region tonight. Ron, thanks. At the other end of the country, the other end of the weather extreme, a dust storm clobbered commuters in the Phoenix area today. Some drivers were forced to pull off the road because of poor visibility. Air quality warnings kept a whole lot of folks inside for the day. When Nightly News continues on a Tuesday night, what's the best way to track the spread of the flu in real time? And one more time, how many shots are kids supposed to get this flu season? Later tonight, helping the body and mind and making a difference in the process. Back now with tonight's news about swine flu. As you may recall, it was last spring the virus first appeared on college campuses. Tonight, it turns out college campuses are turning into a good laboratory for tracking how this virus can spread in all kinds of close quarters. Our chief science correspondent, Robert Bazell, has more tonight on how students on one campus are helping researchers track swine flu, perhaps stop it before it hits.
That's good.
They call themselves the Flu Crew.
You're doing fine.
Scientists and nurses who make daily rounds among students.
And miracle of the jet age, Bob Bazell has traveled from Durham, North Carolina to our NBC affiliate in Minneapolis, KARE, KARE 11. And Bob, I asked to talk to you because I want to put a finer point on something we talked about here last night. This bombshell finding, bombshell if you're the parent of young kids, that this flu season, some kids may require 4 flu shots in all, or 4 nasal sprays. Can you put a finer point on this and what parents can expect?
Well, absolutely, Brian. I double-checked with the CDC today, and it's absolutely true that some kids will need 4 vaccinations. And that'll be the ones who have never been vaccinated before for seasonal influenza. All kids under 10 are going to need 2 swine flu shots. And the ones that haven't had seasonal flu before, they will not need a booster. Excuse me, if they had it before, they'll need a booster.
All right, Bob Bazell in Minneapolis. We'll keep going back at this. Bob, thanks.
Yeah, we will indeed.
All right, when Nightly News continues in just a moment, a whole new way of seeing something we're all already familiar with. Stunning new view of Saturn and its famous rings tonight. This is real. It's from NASA's Cassini spacecraft. It just looks like computer animation. As one scientist put it, quote, "It's like putting on 3D glasses and seeing the third dimension for the first time." Gotta love when scientists wax rhapsodic. More evidence of dramatically changing times from the president of Verizon, one of the larger spin-offs of what we used to call the phone company. According to the New York Times, he told an investor conference a few days ago that the company was, quote, "simply no longer concerned with telephones that are connected with wires." Millions of Americans have been canceling their landlines and going wireless. And the largest wireless network in the country, by the way, is controlled by Verizon. While all of us haven't been, we're told it's usually a really nice crowd of cultured, civilized people who make up the audience at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York's Lincoln Center. But it was anything but last night, apparently, as a new and very different staging of the reliable classic Tosca did not go over well with the opera crowd. When the director and his production team took a curtain call, they were booed off the stage. We're also told you can judge this particular production for yourself if you'd like. It'll be shown live in movie theaters around the world on October 10th. When we come back here tonight, teaming up to make a real difference for people who are trying to get healthy. We're back and it's time for our Making a Difference report. Tonight, a man who does that by showing people the way to better health. The story tonight from NBC's Natalie Morales.
Today, Margaret McLaughlin is a vibrant and healthy 46-year-old. No gym membership required. Natalie Morales, NBC News, New York.
And that's our broadcast for this Tuesday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We hoped, of course, to see you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.